She was promised to a French duke before she could walk, molded, refined, perfected for 23 years to wear his coronet. But on the night before their wedding, he chose her wild, unconventional cousin instead and shattered everything she believed about her worth. Paris, May 1889. The American Cathedral. Katherine Fredrickson stands before a gilded mirror in her wedding preparation room, a vision in Lyonnaise silk and Alençon lace. The American heiress has spent 23 years preparing for this moment, to become the Duchess of Aquitaine through a betrothal arranged at her birth. Every skill mastered, every dream deferred, all to stand beside Lord Renly Fortieri. Outside, Franco-American society gathers, Vanderbilts, Astors, Rothschilds, awaiting the alliance between railroad millions and ancient French nobility. Her cousin Vivica, scandalous and scarlet with paint-stained fingers, delivers an ominous message. Renly requests a private audience in the sacristy, highly irregular. As Katherine gathers her train, she has no idea that in 5 minutes, the life she's spent 2 decades building will shatter like French crystal against marble.
Hello everyone! Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel, like the video and share with loved ones, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. That way YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin.
Paris, May 1889. Katherine Fredrickson had been perfected like a piece of fine porcelain. Delicate, flawless, exquisitely breakable. She stood before the gilded mirror in her preparation room at the American Cathedral, watching her lady's maid Sophie adjust the final pearl tip and pins in her elaborate coiffure. The Lyonnaise silk of her wedding gown caught the morning light filtering through stained glass windows. Each fold and pleat a testament to 3 months of fittings at Worth's atelier. The Alençon lace at her throat had been commissioned specifically to complement the Fortieri family diamond she would wear as Duchess of Aquitaine. 23 years. That's how long she had prepared for this singular moment. Katherine could still recall the weight of her first French grammar book, pressed into her 5-year-old hands by Mademoiselle Beaumont. "You must speak like a Parisian, not an American," her tutor had insisted, rapping Katherine's knuckles when her accent slipped. The summers at Newport had been carefully orchestrated rehearsals, learning which fork, which bow, which smile would transform railroad millions into aristocratic acceptance. The winters in Paris had polished away any remaining rough edges of her New York upbringing. Her father, Harrison Fredrickson, had orchestrated it all with the precision of one of his transcontinental railways. The betrothal contract, signed when Katherine was still in her christening gown, had been his masterpiece. Fredrickson capital merged with Fortieri lineage. She would be the bridge between American ambition and European nobility. The living embodiment of Gilded Age aspirations. "You look like a painting, Miss Katherine," Sophie murmured, stepping back to admire her work. A painting. Katherine's gaze drifted to the leather portfolio tucked discreetly behind her trousseau trunk. Inside lay her secret rebellion, watercolors of Central Park in autumn, the Hudson River at dawn, Newport's cliff walk under storm clouds. She painted in stolen hours, hidden away in her bedroom while the household slept. Her mother had discovered them once and declared such pursuits unsuitable for a future duchess. Ladies of rank might appreciate art. They did not create it with paint-stained fingers and passionate absorption. So Katherine had learned to hide that part of herself, just as she'd learned to hide any opinion that might be deemed too forceful, any laugh that might be too unrestrained, any desire that deviated from the path laid before her since birth. A sharp knock interrupted her reverie. The door opened to reveal her cousin Vivica, Scandalous as always in scarlet silk that would horrify the matrons gathering in the cathedral below. Paint lingered beneath Vivica's fingernails. She'd never learned to hide her artistic nature, had never needed to. As the poor relation, Vivica was allowed her eccentricities, her bohemian studio in Montparnasse, her unconventional friends. Lord Renly requests your presence in the sacristy, Vivica announced, her dark eyes unreadable. Immediately. Catherine's heart stuttered. Now? But the ceremony begins in 30 minutes. He insists it cannot wait. Something flickered across Vivica's face. Triumph? Pity? It vanished before Catherine could decipher it. Sophie helped Catherine gather her train, the weight of the silk suddenly oppressive. This breach of protocol sent unease rippling through her carefully maintained composure. In 23 years of preparation, no one had mentioned the groom summoning his bride minutes before their wedding. Catherine moved through the corridor, her reflection multiplying in the gilt-framed mirrors lining the walls. A woman refined into someone else's vision of perfection. She had no idea that in 5 minutes, every assumption about her worth, her purpose, her entire existence would shatter like French crystal against cold marble. The sacristy door loomed ahead, heavy oak carved with angels who seemed to watch her approach with knowing sorrow. The sacristy smelled of beeswax and old incense. Lord Renly Fortier stood with his back to her, hands clasped behind him in that aristocratic posture she'd always found so elegant. Now it seemed merely cold. Renly? Catherine's voice echoed softly against stone walls. What's wrong? He turned and she saw no warmth in his pale gray eyes, only the clinical assessment of a man appraising horseflesh at auction. Catherine, thank you for coming. This won't take long. Won't take long. Her wedding, their life together, reduced to an inconvenient appointment. I've made a decision, he continued, his French accent crisp as winter frost. One that concerns both our futures. I cannot marry you today. The words hit her like a physical blow, yet Catherine remained perfectly still. 23 years of training held her spine straight, her face composed. I don't understand. I'm choosing Vivica instead. He said it simply, as though selecting wine at dinner. She possesses something you lack, an untamed spirit, authentic passion. You are, he paused, searching for words that would cut cleanest. Too refined, too controlled, too perfect, actually. Modern times require a different sort of duchess, one with fire rather than polish. Catherine's carefully arranged world tilted. Vivica, my cousin Vivica. She's everything you were trained in order to be. It's quite refreshing. A ghost of satisfaction crossed his features. The announcement will be made at this evening's ball. I thought you deserved private notification first. A courtesy, you understand. A courtesy. He was destroying her life and calling it courtesy. But the betrothal contract contains provisions for mutual dissolution. Your father's lawyers will receive the documents. Renly moved toward the door, eager to escape this tedious scene. You're free to retain the wedding gifts already received. Consider it compensation. He left her standing alone among the vestments and prayer books, a bride abandoned in lace and silk. The evening ball transformed Catherine's humiliation into public spectacle. She'd considered fleeing, hiding, disappearing into the Paris streets. But Fredrickson's didn't run, so Catherine dressed in ice blue silk, pinned up her hair, and walked into the Hotel de Crillon ballroom with her mother's diamond choker tied around her throat like a noose. 400 guests filled the gilded space. Vanderbilts, Astors, Rothschilds, the cream of Franco-American society. They'd come expecting a wedding celebration. Instead, Renly stood on the marble dais beside the orchestra, Vivica radiant at his side in crimson silk that seemed to mock Catherine's bridal white from this morning. "Ladies and gentlemen," Renly's voice carried across the suddenly silent room, "the Duchess of Aquitaine." Vivica smiled triumphantly as he placed his mother's coronet in her wild dark curls, the same coronet Catherine had been measured for last month. The gasps began as whispers, then swelled into a wave of shock rippling through the crowd. Heads turned, seeking Catherine. Eyes widened with pity or gleamed with schadenfreude, the particular delight of watching someone fall from great heights. Catherine felt every stare like a needle piercing her carefully constructed armor. Mrs. Astor's sympathetic headshake. The Rothschild daughter's barely concealed whispers behind gloved hands. Her mother's stricken face across the room, social ambitions crumbling like stale cake. But it was her father's expression that finally cracked her composure. Harrison Fredrickson's devastation at seeing his masterwork destroyed, his 23-year investment rendered worthless. Catherine walked through the crowd with mechanical grace, her training holding her together when everything inside screamed to collapse. The pitying murmurs followed her like ghosts. Poor dear. How humiliating. What will she do now? Utterly ruined. Sophie met her at the ballroom entrance with Catherine's cloak. "The carriage, miss?" "No." Catherine's voice surprised her with its steadiness. "Book passage to Italy, tonight if possible. Lake Como. Your mother will understand eventually." Catherine looked back once at the glittering ballroom, at Vivica accepting congratulations in the role that should have been hers, at the life she had spent 23 years preparing to inhabit, now dancing in someone else's arms. The first crack appeared in her perfect composure then. Not tears, but something far more dangerous. Liberation. She'd been broken. But perhaps broken things could be remade into something true. June 1889. Villa Serafina Lake. Como unfolded before Catherine like a watercolor she'd never dare paint. Impossible blues deepening to violet where mountains met water. Villages clinging to hillsides in terracotta and ochre. Gardens cascading toward the shore in riots of wisteria and oleander. Villa Serafina perched above the water. Her godmother's sanctuary of frescoed ceilings and marble terraces where cicadas sang through shuttered afternoons. Contessa Giuliana Bianchi had welcomed Catherine without questions, merely pressing a key into her palm. The art studio overlooking the lake. For 2 weeks, Catherine had barely left it. Half-finished watercolors covered every surface. The same view of Como painted obsessively in different lights, different moods. Dawn's rose gold, noon's crystalline brightness, twilight's melancholy purple. She painted until her hands cramped, until colors blurred through unshed tears, until exhaustion finally granted brief, dreamless sleep. The studio became her refuge from the letters that arrived with brutal regularity. Her mother's elegant script demanded she return to New York immediately. Salvage what remains of our reputation. Her father's terse telegram, disappointment immeasurable. Return. Society pages Sophie had forwarded chronicled her humiliation in gleeful detail. American heiress jilted for penniless cousin. Catherine burned them all in the studio's fireplace, watching her old life turn to ash. "You're punishing yourself, Cara." Juliana's voice came from the doorway one afternoon, accompanied by the scent of bergamot tea. The Contessa moved with the unhurried grace of Italian nobility, her silver hair elegant against russet silk. "You paint the same scene as though repetition might reveal some hidden answer." I don't know what else to do. Catherine's brush trembled above the paper. 23 years preparing for one purpose. And now you are free. Juliana set down the tea tray, studying Catherine's latest painting with a curator's eye. You were being sold, Catherine, a commodity in your father's negotiation. The contract was dissolved, yes, but so were your chains. Free? Catherine's laugh carried an edge of bitterness. I'm ruined. No prospects. No purpose. No prison. Juliana's dark eyes were fierce. That betrothal was a gilded cage, Bella. You were being trained like a performing bird. Speak this way, move that way, never sing your own song. Now you can discover the price of your own soul. The words settled into Catherine's chest, heavy and unsettling. That evening, as she painted the lake at sunset, Sophie brought news that made her brush slip, crimson bleeding across blue water like a wound. Miss Catherine, I'm sorry, but you should know. Sophie clutched the Paris newspaper. Lord Renly and Miss Vivica, they married yesterday. A rush ceremony. Catherine took the paper with steady hands, reading between the diplomatic lines. Rushed, necessary. Vivica was pregnant, so that was why. The untamed passion Renly praised had manifested in the most conventional consequence imaginable. He'd needed a quick wedding, and Catherine, perfect, patient Catherine, would have insisted on propriety, delays, proper arrangements. Vivica had offered immediate solutions to immediate problems. Catherine walked onto the terrace, watching stars emerge over the darkening lake. She waited for the pain, the fresh humiliation. Instead, something unexpected bloomed in her chest. Relief. Vivica was trapped now in the role Catherine had spent a lifetime rehearsing. The performance would be flawless because Catherine had perfected every gesture, but it would be a performance nonetheless. And Vivica, wild, authentic Vivica, would suffocate in those gilded chains. Catherine returned to her easel, but this time she painted something different. Not the lake, but her own hands. Paint-stained, free, finally her own. Will Catherine discover her true worth beyond society's expectations? Continue reading to witness her transformation from abandoned heiress to celebrated artist. Subscribe now to receive the next act in this tale of betrayal, reinvention, and finding freedom in the ruins of broken dreams. Late June 1889, Villa Serafina. Contessa, you didn't mention you'd acquired new Bellinis. The man's voice drifted up from the gallery below, cultured and genuinely astonished. These watercolors are extraordinary. The technique, the luminosity. Where did you find them? Catherine froze at the top of the marble staircase, her morning painting smock still splattered with cerulean blue. She'd left 3 finished Lake Como studies in the gallery yesterday, never imagining anyone would see them. Those? Juliana's amused reply carried clearly. Not Bellini, Alessandro. Come, let me introduce you to the actual artist. Catherine barely had time to remove her smock before Juliana appeared with her guest, a man perhaps 35, dark-haired and dressed with understated elegance that spoke of old money rather than new. Count Alessandro Vittorio Savelli, she'd learn later, though he introduced himself simply as Alessandro, a collector of beautiful mistakes. Mistakes? Catherine echoed, uncertain whether to be offended. I mistook your work for a master's. His smile transformed his serious face, revealing unexpected warmth. A collector's most delightful error, discovering genius hiding in plain sight. You captured something in that light I've never seen rendered so truthfully. The way morning transforms water into liquid gold. He gestured helplessly. Forgive me. I become insufferable about art. For the first time in weeks, Catherine felt sees something other than grief or numbness. You really think they're good? I think they're remarkable. Alessandro moved back to study them with a connoisseur's intensity. Your use of negative space here, the way you suggest depth without overworking, it's Renaissance technique applied with impressionist sensibility. Where did you train? I didn't. Not formally. Catherine felt heat rise to her cheeks. Watercolors were my secret rebellion. Ladies aren't supposed to create? Alessandro turned, his dark eyes sharp with understanding. Only consume, admire, collect? What provincial nonsense. He said it with such casual dismissal of centuries of social convention that Catherine almost laughed. What began as a courtesy visit stretched into hours. Alessandro spoke of art the way other men discuss politics or business, with passionate intensity and intellectual rigor. He asked Catherine's opinion on chiaroscuro in Caravaggio, perspective in Piero della Francesca, the emotional truth of Giotto's frescoes. Not once did he treat her views as charming novelties from a woman dabbling in masculine pursuits. You must see my collection at Palazzo Svelli, he insisted as afternoon light slanted golden through the windows. I have a Botticelli study you'd appreciate, and several Bellini sketches for comparison to your technique. Juliana watched them with barely concealed satisfaction, like a chess master seeing pieces fall into unexpected alignment. Over the following weeks, Catherine discovered Alessandro's story in careful increments. The palazzo in Bellagio, inherited young after his father's death. His widowhood, wife and infant daughter lost to fever 5 years prior, a grief he carried quietly like a stone in his pocket. His retreat into art collecting, surrounding himself with beauty to wall out sorrow. I haven't painted since Maria died, he admitted one afternoon as they stood before his Botticelli, a Madonna with child that must have become unbearable after his loss. Couldn't bear creating anything when I'd failed to preserve what mattered most. Catherine understood that particular paralysis. I painted to remember who I was beneath all the training. You stopped painting to forget who you'd lost. Perhaps we're both afraid of what art reveals, Alessandro said quietly. The painting expedition to Via Carlotta's Camellia Gardens had been Juliana's suggestion, transparently matchmaking, but irresistible nonetheless. Catherine accepted, surprising herself with eagerness. As Alessandro departed that evening, he paused at the villa's entrance. I've spent 5 years avoiding anyone who might matter. Then I see your watercolors and remember why beauty exists, to remind us we're still alive enough to be wounded by it. Catherine stood on the terrace long after his carriage disappeared down the winding road, her heart performing unfamiliar acrobatics. For the first time since Paris, she felt something beyond pain or numbness. She felt possibility. August 1889, Villa Serafina. Catherine was sketching wisteria when Sophie announced the visitor, her voice tight with disapproval. The Duchess of Aquitaine requests an audience. The charcoal snapped between Catherine's fingers. Vivica appeared on the terrace like an apparition from another life. Her figure thickened with pregnancy beneath expensive Parisian silk. Dark circles shadowed her eyes despite carefully applied powder. The wild cousin who'd worn scarlet and paint-stained fingers now looked like a porcelain doll dressed by someone else's hand. Catherine. Vivica's voice carried none of its former confidence. I needed to. She pressed trembling fingers to her temples. May we speak privately? Against every instinct, screaming warnings, Catherine dismissed Sophie and gestured to a chair. You've traveled far while expecting. That can't have been comfortable. Nothing's comfortable anymore. Vivica sank into the seat with visible relief, one hand unconsciously protecting her swollen belly. I had to see you. Had to explain. Explain stealing my fiancé? Catherine kept her voice neutral, watching her cousin with the detached curiosity one might observe a snake in a garden. It wasn't about him. Vivica's words tumbled out desperately. It was about you, perfect Catherine. Catherine, who had everything handed to her for simply existing properly, the betrothal, the training, the certainty of your place in the world. You think that was a gift? Catherine set down her charcoal, genuinely bewildered. I was the poor relation. Vivica's composure cracked, revealing raw resentment beneath. Tolerated at family gatherings, pitied for my artistic hobbies because I'd never marry well. Do you know what it's like watching someone live your dream life while you're treated as a curiosity? A cautionary tale. My dream life? Catherine's laugh held no humor. I was property, Vivica, a commodity in a contract signed before I could speak. Every skill I learned, every word I uttered, every thought I buried, all to fulfill someone else's ambitions. But you had purpose. Vivica stood abruptly, pacing the terrace with caged energy. I pursued Renly deliberately, seduced him really, made him believe I was everything untamed and passionate that you weren't. And when he chose me over you, she turned, eyes glittering. For one glorious moment, I'd won something you couldn't have simply by being perfect. The confession hung between them like smoke. And now, Catherine asked softly, seeing her cousin clearly for perhaps the first time, now that you've won, Vivica's mask shattered completely. It's suffocating. He's cold, Catherine. Controlling. Everything I do is wrong. Too loud, too opinionated, too much. He wants me to perform being a duchess, but I don't know the steps. You knew them instinctively because you'd rehearsed them for 23 years. Her voice dropped to a whisper. I'm trapped in a role I'm failing at, carrying a child who'll be raised by nurses while I smile properly at diplomatic dinners. Catherine should have felt vindication. Instead, she felt only clarity, sharp and clean as glass. You freed me from a prison you now inhabit willingly. She stood, meeting Vivica's desperate gaze with unexpected strength. You wanted what I had, you have it. The coronet, the title, the performance, but you can't have my forgiveness because I'm grateful for what you did. Grateful? Vivica looked stricken. You revealed the truth of that cage before I was locked inside it forever. Catherine moved to the terrace edge, looking out at Como's freedom. I spent my whole life preparing to be someone else's duchess. Now I'm learning to be myself. I've made a terrible mistake, Vivica whispered. Yes, Catherine agreed without cruelty. But it was your choice, as leaving was mine. After Vivica's carriage disappeared down the mountain road, Catherine returned to her easel with renewed purpose. She'd wasted weeks grieving a life that would have destroyed her slowly, degree by degree, until nothing authentic remained. Her hand moved across fresh paper with confident strokes, painting not what she'd lost, but what she was becoming. September 1889. Villa Carlotta. The camellia gardens blazed with late summer color, crimson and blush pink against glossy dark leaves, terraced hillsides descending to the lake in calculated wildness. Alessandro set up their easels beneath a pergola heavy with jasmine, his movements precise but relaxed, a man comfortable in his own skin. Tell me something true, he said, mixing cobalt blue on his palette. Not polite, not careful, something you'd never say in a Paris salon. Catherine considered, her brush hovering over paper. I spent 23 years perfecting a performance, and the moment I stopped acting, Everything I'd built collapsed. Sometimes I'm terrified that without the role, there's nothing substantial left. And other times, Alessandro's dark eyes held hers. Other times I think maybe the collapse was necessary, that substantial things can only grow in ruins. She began painting, surprised by her own honesty. Your turn, something true. I love my wife desperately, he said quietly. But after she died, I realized I'd loved the idea of us more than who we actually were. She wanted a traditional count's wife life. I wanted an artistic partner. We performed compatibility rather than building it. His brush moved across canvas in bold strokes. I've spent 5 years afraid to feel anything real, because real things hurt when you lose them. They painted in companionable silence, the only sounds brushstrokes and distant water lapping stone. Over the following weeks, their connection deepened through shared expeditions. The Accademia Carrara in Bergamo, where Alessandro explained how Botticelli achieved his ethereal transparency. The small churches dotting Como's hillsides with their ancient frescoes depicting saints in jeweled colors. Art reveals what society's masks conceal. Alessandro insisted one afternoon before a Bellini Madonna. Look how he painted her hands. Work roughened, real. Not some ethereal fantasy, but an actual woman holding an actual child. That's truth, Catherine. Everything else is performance. The rainstorm caught them by surprise near a forgotten chapel clinging to a mountainside. They took shelter inside, shaking water from their clothes while thunder rolled across the lake. Centuries-old frescoes covered the walls, a last judgment with demons and angels locked in eternal battle, the paint flaking but still vivid. Lightning illuminated Alessandro's face as he turned to her, rain-wet and intense. I've been half alive since Maria died. Then I saw your paintings and felt something shift. You paint like someone discovering the color for the first time. I'm discovering everything for the first time, Catherine admitted. Who I am without someone telling me who to be. And who are you? He moved closer, close enough that she could see gold flecks in his dark eyes. Still learning. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Still becoming. May I be honest about something frightening? His voice dropped low. I'm terrified of caring about you. Of building something real that could break me again when it ends. Who says it has to end? Catherine surprised herself with her courage. The space between them crackled with possibility. Alessandro reached up, fingertips brushing her cheek with devastating gentleness. Catherine. Thunder crashed directly overhead, the storm's clearing announced by sudden shafts of light through stone windows. The moment suspended, trembling on the edge of something irreversible. Alessandro stepped back, breathing unsteadily. The storm's passed. We should return before Juliana sends search parties. But as they walked back through rain-fresh gardens, his hand found hers. Tentative, questioning, real. That evening he asked formally, May I court you, Katherine? Not as the heiress you were trained to be, but as the artist you're becoming. She thought of all the choices made for her, all the decisions arranged by others. This one would be entirely her own. Yes, Catherine said, and felt her future shift, like color bleeding into water. Uncertain but luminous with possibility. Catherine is finally choosing her own path. But will love be enough to rebuild a shattered life? Subscribe now to follow her journey from abandoned heiress to celebrated artist, and discover whether she'll find the courage to embrace her authentic self. Don't miss the next act in this transformative tale of second chances. Late October 1889, Villa Carlotta Gardens. Autumn had transformed Lake Como into a Renaissance palette. burnt sienna and golden ochre, deep burgundy against evergreen. The lake reflecting copper light as the afternoon sun descended. Catherine set up her easel among the garden's last blooms, late flowering camellias and chrysanthemums defying the season's end. Alessandro had been unusually quiet all morning, his typical easy conversation replaced by distracted intensity. He painted with uncharacteristic abandon, his brushstrokes bold and decisive, as though making some silent argument with the canvas. "You're painting like a man at war," Catherine observed, mixing crimson for the camellias. "Perhaps I am." He set down his brush, wiping paint-stained hands on his smock with an endearingly nervous gesture she'd never seen from him before. "Catherine, I need to tell you something before my courage fails." Her heart stuttered, brush frozen mid-stroke. Alessandro moved closer, and she saw vulnerability naked in his face. This composed, cultured count, suddenly as uncertain as a boy. "These months with you have been—" He searched for words. "I've been half dead since Maria. Moving through life like a ghost in my own galleries, surrounding myself with beautiful things because I'd lost the capacity to create them. Then you appeared with your Lake Como watercolors and your fierce honesty about being broken, and suddenly I remembered what it meant to feel." "Alessandro, please let me finish before I lose my nerve entirely." His smile was shaky. "You're not healed. Neither am I, but I think—" He drew a breath. "I think perhaps we could heal together, build something real rather than perform something expected." He knelt then, among the autumn leaves and fading flowers, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket with trembling hands. Inside, an emerald ring caught the light, old gold, exquisitely worked, the stone deep green as Como's depths. "This was my great-grandmother's. She was Venetian, scandalously artistic, married a count against her family's wishes because she loved him." Alessandro's voice roughened with emotion. "Katherine Fredrickson, will you marry me? Not because of contracts or duty or what society expects, but because I value your authentic vision more than any performance. Because your courage to remake yourself inspires me to try living again." The world narrowed to this moment, this man, this choice, this future she could claim entirely for herself. Catherine thought of the girl who'd stood before mirrors in Paris, perfected and hollow. Thought of Vivica trapped in the role Catherine had escaped. Thought of all the choices made for her by others who'd never asked what she wanted. "Yes." The word emerged clear and certain. "Yes, because you see who I actually am rather than who I was trained to be. Yes, because you're the first person who's ever asked me to choose." Alessandro slipped the ring on her finger, a perfect fit, as though even his great-grandmother had conspired in this moment. He stood, pulling Catherine into an embrace that felt like coming home to a place she'd never known existed. "I should write to your father," he murmured against her hair. "Ask his permission formally." "No." Catherine pulled back, meeting his startled gaze with steady determination. "I'll write to inform him of my engagement, not to seek permission. This is my choice, Alessandro, mine alone." Understanding dawned in his eyes, followed by fierce pride. "My revolutionary artist." That evening, Catherine sat at Juliana's escritoire and wrote to Harrison Fredrickson, not the dutiful daughter reporting to authority, but a woman announcing her own future. "Father, I am engaged to Count Alessandro Savelli of Bellagio. We will marry in Florence this December. Your presence would be welcomed, but your approval is not required. I have learned the difference. Your daughter, Catherine." She sealed the letter with wax, her hand steady. The engagement celebration at Villa Serafina 3 days later was intimate, Italian society, local artists, Juliana beaming like a proud mother. No Astors or Vanderbilts, no performance, just Catherine, finally choosing her own masterpiece. December 1889, Florence. San Miniato al Monte overlooked Florence like a benediction. Romanesque marble glowing white and green against winter sky, the entire city spread below in terracotta magnificence. Catherine stood at the altar in dove-gray silk, no Worth gown or Alençon lace, just Florentine simplicity that made her luminous. 30 guests filled the ancient church. Juliana wept elegantly. Local artist Alessandro had befriended attended with genuine warmth. And in the back pew, to Catherine's shock, sat Harrison Fredrickson, her father who'd crossed an ocean without invitation, his proud face carved with something that might have been remorse. "I choose you," Alessandro said when the priest prompted his vows. "Every day, I choose you." "I choose myself," Catherine replied, her own vow. "And in doing so, I choose us." The priest looked momentarily confused, but Alessandro's eyes shone with understanding. Spring 1890, Palazzo Savelli. Marriage to Alessandro was nothing like the Duchess training Catherine had endured. He encouraged her painting with the fervor of a patron discovering genius. Their palazzo became a salon for Florence's Macchiaioli painters, artists who'd rejected academic formality for authentic observation, capturing Tuscan light with revolutionary technique. "Your American eye sees our landscape fresh," Giovanni Fattori told her one afternoon, studying her watercolor of the Arno at sunrise. "This belongs in exhibition, Contessa." Catherine, still startled at the title. Contessa Savelli. She'd become a countess after all, but through choice rather than arrangement, partnership rather than transaction. Alessandro converted the palazzo's east wing into her studio, north-facing windows, proper ventilation, storage for her growing body of work. He had commissioned a brass plaque for the door. Studio di Katherine Savelli, Artista. Artist, not hobby, not pastime. Her true calling finally claimed. Summer 1891, Palazzo Savelli. The letter arrived on thick cream paper embossed with official seals. International Art Exhibition, Musée du Louvre, Paris. We are pleased to invite Contessa Katherine Savelli to exhibit her Lake Como watercolor series. Catherine's hands trembled. Paris, where she'd been humiliated, dismissed, destroyed. Now they wanted her art. "You don't have to go," Alessandro said quietly, reading her expression. "No," Catherine straightened, decision crystallizing. "I want to, not for vindication, for completion." The exhibition preparation became her focus. 18 months after her betrayal, Catherine selected 12 watercolors from her Lake Como series, dawn to dusk, season to season, capturing the lake's transformative beauty through her own transformation. The night before departure, Harrison Fredrickson arrived unannounced at the palazzo. Age had softened him, or perhaps regret had. "Catherine." His voice cracked on her name. "May we speak?" In Alessandro's study, surrounded by Renaissance masters, her father finally broke. "I sold you, treated you as commodity rather than daughter, watched you perfect yourself into someone else's vision and called it success." Tears tracked his weathered face. "Then you fled to Italy and became this, yourself. Everything I should have encouraged from the beginning. You taught me to perform perfectly," Catherine said without anger. "But you also gave me the discipline to perfect my art. Both shaped me. Can you forgive me?" "I already have, Father. Forgiving you means I'm free of you. free of needing your approval to validate my worth. Harrison Fredrickson embraced his daughter then, perhaps for the first time seeing not an investment, but a remarkable woman he'd nearly destroyed through ambition. Paris, April 1891. The Louvre Salon was everything Catherine remembered. Gilded opulence, society's finest in silk and diamonds. But this time, she walked through those doors as Contessa Savelli, as an exhibiting artist whose Lake Como series hung in the main gallery. Critics praised her luminous technique and emotional depth. Collectors inquired about commissions. Italian nobility requested portraits. And in the corner before her painting of Como at twilight, Alessandro stood with unmistakable pride, watching his wife claim the recognition she'd earned not through birth or betrothal, but through authentic talent finally unleashed. Catherine had become the woman she was meant to be, not the duchess she was assigned to be. Spring 1891, Musée du Louvre. The Salon des Artistes hummed with Parisian society, the same faces that had witnessed Catherine's humiliation 2 years prior. Now they gathered before her Lake Como watercolors, murmuring appreciation for Contessa Savelli's revolutionary technique and profound emotional resonance. Catherine moved through the crowd in forest green silk, Alessandro's hand steady at her back. She felt no anxiety, no need to perform. The paintings spoke for themselves, 12 studies of transformation captured in pigment and light. Catherine, the voice stopped her mid-stride. She turned to find Renly and Vivica standing before her largest piece, Como at Dawn, the painting she created the morning after Vivica's confession. Renly looked unchanged, aristocratically handsome in the cold, precise way she'd once found elegant. Vivica looked haunted. The Duchess of Aquitaine wore sapphire silk that perfectly matched her title's expectations, but her eyes held the desperate emptiness of a woman trapped behind glass. Lord Renly. Vivica. Catherine's voice carried polite neutrality. How unexpected. Your work is... Renly paused, visibly uncomfortable. Charming. A lovely hobby for a countess. Hobby. The dismissal was instinctive, reflexive. He couldn't comprehend that what he'd rejected as too refined, too controlled, had contained depths he'd never bothered to discover. These have been commissioned by the Uffizi, Alessandro interjected smoothly, his Italian accent a subtle reminder of Catherine's new world. Hardly a hobby when museums compete for the work. Vivica's gaze locked onto Catherine's, desperate and pleading. Might we speak privately, just for a moment? Against Alessandro's subtle headshake, Catherine nodded. They stepped into a quieter alcove, leaving the men in stiff, masculine silence. I made a terrible mistake, Vivica whispered immediately. You know I did. Every day I wake up in that prison you escaped. And her voice broke. You were right. I'm failing at a performance you'd perfected. Renly is disappointed constantly. I'm suffocating. Catherine studied her cousin, this woman who deliberately destroyed her future out of jealous rage. She waited for satisfaction, for vindication, for the sweet taste of schadenfreude. Instead, she felt only clarity, clean, crystalline clarity. I'm not sorry for you, Vivica, she said quietly, but I'm not glad either. You chose your cage with open eyes. I was born into mine and fortunate enough to escape. But how do I? That's your question to answer. You wanted my life, you have it. What you do with it now is entirely yours. Catherine touched Vivica's hand briefly. I hope you find your own Como someday, your own transformation. But you won't find it in my forgiveness or my pity. She returned to Alessandro, who gathered her close protectively. Renly made awkward pleasantries about Catherine's provincial success, before guiding his miserable duchess away. "Are you well?" Alessandro murmured against her hair. "I'm perfect," Catherine said, and meant it without irony. Later, along the Seine, Catherine set up her portable easel where tourists and artists gathered, painting in plein air as Monet had taught the world to see. The Seine flowed past in impressionist ripples, light dancing on water the way it had on Como that first grief-stricken morning. Alessandro sat nearby, sketching her sketching. A man capturing his wife, capturing the world. "What are you thinking?" he asked. Catherine studied her emerging painting, loose, confident, authentically hers. "That I spent 23 years being molded into someone else's masterpiece. Then I shattered, and in the breaking, discovered I could paint my own." She thought of the girl in the gilded mirror, perfected and hollow. That girl was gone. In her place stood an artist, a wife by choice, a woman who'd claimed her own worth from the ruins of arranged expectations. The life she lived now wasn't the one she'd been promised. It was infinitely better, because it was undeniably, irrevocably, authentically hers. Catherine dipped her brush in cerulean blue and painted the sky. Every ending is a beginning in disguise. Catherine's journey from abandoned heiress to celebrated artist proves that our greatest transformations often emerge from our deepest betrayals. If this story of reinvention, courage, and choosing your own masterpiece resonated with you, subscribe now for more tales of women who refused to remain broken and became extraordinary instead.
If you enjoyed this story, we appreciate you a whole lot and look forward to connecting with you as we build a community on this channel. Every day, we will put out more stories, so we need your support. Help us by liking, sharing, and subscribing to our channel if you haven't already. You won't miss any new exciting videos. Check out the next video. You'll love it!